Oh man, everybody, I bet you already know where we are. That's Little Round Top behind me. I'm Gary Edelman, American Battlefield Trust. We've got a couple of guests with us while we talk about the attack and defense of Little Round Top in brief, and then a special surprise from a cool rock coming up at the end. So here we are on Little Round Top. Let's just do a little bit of an orientation here. On July 2nd, 1863, Little Round Top was entirely unoccupied, save for some signalmen. This is on the afternoon of July 2nd. You know that's happening because Dan Sickles has moved his 3rd Corps out to the Peach Orchard and Emmetsburg Road and is going to bend his line back through what we now call the wheat field, anchoring right around that pile of rocks there, my favorite place in the world, Devil's Den. Okay, so the 3rd Corps is out in front of Little Round Top, theoretically blocking it, but as we all know, the Confederates, who come from the most distant tree line you could see over there, Seminary Ridge and Warfield's Ridge, and the troops who will attack here are going to come like this, and they are going to far outlap Sickles' line over here. In fact, they outlap it so far that some of them reach the very crest of Big Round Top. That's the right flank of the 15th Alabama. Coming from there, there are more Alabamians, the 47th and the 4th. Then there's some Texans, the 5th and the 4th Texas. And then there's sort of fighting going on down here at Devil's Den with the 44th and 48th Alabama, sort of where we are and a little bit off to my left here. Later, the Confederates are coming from the other side of Devil's Den, but that's a time for another video here. For now, we want to talk about the attack and defense of Little Round Top. These regiments attacking Little Round Top at 5:30 or 6 p.m. roughly on July 2nd, 1863. And to cover this, we're going to bring on Doug Dowd's licensed battlefield guide, U.S. Army War College. But before he does, just keep in mind that even as the Confederates are coming across this area, even as we know these trees were further back and the Texans are exposed, there are a couple of guns for a time in the valley under Smith that are firing obliquely through the gully at the Texans attacking the hill.
So we can pick up this story, and it's a wonderful view that we have down here. When we think about the first part of this in echelon attack, domino number 1, these would be Laws, Alabamans. They've been marching since 3:30 this morning, already put in 26 miles before they cross the line of departure with no canteens on a hot, humid day like today. As they go up and over Big Round Top, what they're going to do is they're going to hear the fighting taking place, and that's why those 2 Alabama regiments will spin down and slam into the southern face of Devil's Den. And the way this attack works is the next domino that hits Devil's Den will spin off 2 regiments, the 4th and 5th Texas. And at first, from the Confederate side, we should go, wait a minute, we have brigades that are doing this. That shouldn't happen. And you're right, it shouldn't. But this is because John Bell Hood, in the first 10 minutes of the attack, the division commander, a shell will explode over the head. He gets wounded in the arm, and he's out. All of a sudden, now we have some confusion out there. And the way this attack works into Devil's Den is, as the Confederates come across and over Big Round Top into the saddle between Big and Little Round Top, they'll hit the Union line, they'll be repelled, they'll go back in this saddle, and they'll slide to their right, effectively looking for the Union attack. Always attack, fall back, slide to the right. This ultimately will lead to the famous charge of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain in the 20th Maine that everybody's familiar with. Now, the interesting part about this perspective is we're really sitting just about where the 4th and 5th Texas are. They're going to slam into the Union position, and we have a really nice view of the 44th New York, big castle monument up there, as well as the 16th Michigan. The 16th Michigan, when they get hit by the 4th and 5th Texas, and even from this angle, you can see they're the end of the line. And so they're going to wrap around, and truth be told, we don't actually know what happens. We can imagine maybe the colonel refuses the right. All of a sudden, he looks, and to his horror, he realizes the flag bearer's taking a step back too, and all of a sudden, this part of the line is falling back. What we have now is Gouverneur Warren is personally looking for more Union troops to bring up here. He'll run in. You know, we talk about friction on battlefields all the time, but there's also chance. Of the 51 brigades in the Army of the Potomac, he runs into his old brigade, that day currently under the command of Colonel Patty O'Rourke of the 44th New York. And so what he's going to do, of the 140th New York, what he's going to do is he's going to race those troops up there, and they will be the first one to arrive. In fact, as they arrive, we know at least perhaps the first 2 companies haven't loaded their rifles. There's no time. With the 4th and 5th Texas spilling around the right flank of the Michigan men, Patty O'Rourke will draw his sword, lean back over his shoulder, and say, "Down this way, boys!" He'll be shot in the neck, and he'll bleed to death just in front of that monument up there. 540 men from the state of New York will slam into those men from Texas, and all of a sudden the wings will waver, they'll stall before those men from the 4th and 5th Texas will drift back down into the saddle between Little and Big Round Top, and that will secure this side of Little Round Top. Now Little Round Top becomes a Union island as the rest of the Union line is under assault, but from that point on, it will always be under Union hands. Gary?
Good, good. Thanks, Doug. And I like to picture this. The slopes of Little Round Top. I don't quite know if we're in the slaughter pen. I don't think we are. I think the slaughter pen starts a little bit further past the footbridge over Plum Run over there. But for my part, I know we have enough photos to know that this was open terrain. It was grazed by cattle. We even have pictures in 1863 of cattle in the Valley of Death, and we have an account from Henry Hunt actually having his most demoralizing experience on the battlefield, trying to deal with getting past some horned cattle. In any case, so imagine it being much more open here. Then imagine you could see it from here. The woods are 100 yards back. You'd be able to see the Texans going up the slope up there, the 4th Texas, the 5th Texas, and they're getting decimated by Smith's guns at that point. They're taking fire from the front. Now, a lot of people talk about whether these guys had any help up there, okay? And let's remember, when the Texans went up, they didn't just come back and go up again. I don't know, depending on how you listen to, 3 charges, 4 charges, 5 charges. And every time they did that, they had to fall back across what is modern Warren Avenue and then go another 100 yards to the shelter of the woods. It was not easy to do this. People often talk about, well, but what about the soldiers at Devil's Den, like the 48th Alabama, who in my opinion is right here? So on some maps they appear. Did they help with the attack? I don't think so. I think they only provided support. What about the 2nd Georgia? Henry Benning's brigade came up, and the 2nd Georgia is right in this very area. After dueling with the 40th New York up in the valley and maybe the 6th New Jersey, they clear that area. Does the 2nd Georgia come up? Their colonel, William Terrell Harris, I believe is his name, or maybe it's Shepard. I think it's Harris. He goes over Plum Run and says, "Come with me, boys." They said it was more like Indian fighting than anything they'd ever experienced during the war. He gets shot through the heart, dies on the spot. None of his men follow. And all the Confederate soldiers who helped tip the scales and win the Battle of Devil's Den, none of them materially helped the Confederates on Little Round Top. Let me bring up Chris Mikowski. Who knows what he has in mind?
One of the things that always I find remarkable about this terrain, thanks to the landscape renovations and restorations the Park Service has done, we can see this so much more clearly than we could once upon a time. And imagine, again, how hot it was on that July 2nd. And if you're part of those Texans going up across this rocky terrain and then up that hill, imagine what it was like to make that assault. You can see how difficult this would be to hold your formation as you're moving forward. The topography is going to wreak havoc on those formations. Then you also have a fair amount of cover as you're going uphill. But you're going uphill, and that's never an easy thing, particularly when you're loaded down with as much equipment as you are. But then imagine the Federals on the top of that hill. They've got to get right up to the crest to fire down in order to depress their rifles enough to hit any of those targets. So that's why you have such an up-close fight up at the top of that hill that Doug talked about. Because the assault has some cover, the Federals have topography working against them, and then suddenly this ground just becomes embroiled in a terrible, terrible fight. Let's hop down off the rock here, because I think Gary's got some pretty cool stuff to show us on the other side of the stones.
All right, good. Chris, you have anything to add right now? While you're jumping down off the rocks?
Yeah, let me do some interpretation as I run down here.
Well,
this is awesome. Down through here, I think that a lot of people need to understand that the battlefield will change over time, and that is because people are going to start to come out to these battlefields just like we do today, just like we're doing right now. And you would have had a trolley line that ran through here at one point. You would have a photographic studio that Gary's going to talk about here at one point. You're also going to have picnic pavilions. You'll have tourists down here. I mean, this place is going to change over time. Monuments might be moved from place to place as roads are put in. And you're going to have a really interesting life after this battle, and I think that's what Gary's going to jump into right now.
Yeah, I think that's great. The story of the commercialization and the fight for preservation at this battlefield is, in some ways as fascinating as the Battle of Gettysburg. You've got all the human characteristics. You've got life, death, last-minute will requests and everything like that. But I just want to talk about one bit of it. First of all, we know that in the 1880s, a guy named Mumford started a photographic studio here, and that studio was later bought by a guy named Tipton. William Tipton just happened to be involved with the Gettysburg Electric Railway. This was a railway that went from the town of Gettysburg across the field of Pickett's Charge and all over the place. It's going to make a curve around Devil's Den. It's going to stop at an amusement park in Rose Woods at the time, and then it will stop here at Tipton's Park. What do you know? Does it seem like self-interest? And he bought that photographic studio. It ends up right here, okay? And that photographic studio was not all. There was a dance floor and live music. You paid a quarter. You could get gin drinks. You could get other drinks. There was all sorts of stuff going on here. There was at least 4 buildings in these woods in the 1890s and early 1900s. Now, one feature that's left of it, because happily it's all gone, is this rock, the Trough rock. I don't know why people argue that, oh, maybe it was here during the battle. First of all, we have pictures of the rock, and I think you can clearly see it's not here. Secondly, why would somebody cut a trough in the middle of nowhere where 4 property lines came together at a place nobody wanted? It makes 0 sense. And why would you cut a trough for horses here when Plum Run is just about 60 feet away? It doesn't make any sense. But I do know one thing you need at a photographic studio is water. It's a wet plate process, and you need that clear, good spring water. And there's a spring or 2 springs within 30 feet of this position. In any case, this famous photo shows, famous if you're a big enough nerd, a horse drinking out of the trough. And then you can see in the trough rock, hey, here's some of these iron rings. I guess this is where they hitched their horses while they could water. But it still didn't make sense to me with a Plum Run so close by. One thing you can see in here is the shadow from and even the porch of the photographic studio right here. So the photographic studio was right next to where we are standing, okay? There are other photos of this called the flowing rock, the fountain rock, because they said that water came down the front. You can almost see it being, stained rock at the time. Now, and here is the trough. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but just in case anybody thinks this is nice, clear spring water anymore, I can show you that it is algae-ridden and bacteria-ridden and potentially dangerous. So we'll talk about that right at the end. In any case, Tim Smith and I had found some of the springs back here. We also found some terracotta piping and wondered whether they were piping water up to the top of the trough rock, and then it was coming in, and then these were not for horses. Maybe this was an ejection spout that would let the water drain out. We speculated on that, wrote our Devil's Den book, put it in there, but didn't know for sure. But of course, when you write a book, this happens to us all. These things happen, and boom, there's the ejection spout, just like we thought. You can see the water kind of flowing down the rock. And what's interesting is you can see a rock on top of the fountain rock. Let me explain how this worked real quick, or the trough rock. They were pumping water from all the way back there. There's a hole in this rock that's going to hold the pipe here. Then there's a hole drilled in the top of the rock. The hose is being held down by the rock, and that water is there. And to this day, if I were to pour water down this hole, it would come out a hole that's right here, and it will flow down the rock. I think it's pretty clear that this trough was for the visitors to Tipton Park, and this is our remnant, sort of Tipton Park. Let me say that we have pictures of people at the photographic studio. We have at least a dozen photos of people at and outside the photographic studio here. As for the photographic studio itself, let me see if I have the picture handy. Give me a sec here, I'm almost there. Talk amongst yourselves. This building was later rolled bodily up Warren Avenue, and it sat on the slopes of Little Round Top starting in about 1906, I think, after the U.S. government had condemned the land. Yes, the Park Service or the government could condemn land for purposes of a national park. It went to the Supreme Court. You can look it up. And then they let a guy named Blind Davy operate the photographic studio. And when you see this, you see he sells sandwiches, he sells coffee. But the best part about this story, if you can focus in on Davy, Blind Davy has a gun. Blind Davy has a gun. And either way, he's got a seeing eye dog too, so I wouldn't mess with the guy. And that is just one small story of the commercialization of Gettysburg. These battlefields are great places to come to study, humanity during battles. But remember, battles often lasted a day or two, and the study of them actually needs to go into the decades thereafter. Chris?
I want to put Gary on the spot here for just a second. He and I had the opportunity to have a conversation in an interview that we had in Emerging Civil War that'll be showing up in Civil War News. And you talk about the different commercial uses here, and it reminds me of something you'd said in that interview where people sometimes ask you, how do you behave on a battlefield?
Yeah.
And you really drew from these sorts of experiences to come up with what I thought was a great answer, and I kind of wanted to put you on the spot to see if you'd share that.
Yeah, I don't know how I said it that day, but I do. As a battlefield guide, we all experience this, right? People come to a battlefield, they're not really sure what's okay. I've seen people laugh and cry. I've seen them pass out, lash out at me, get mad at me, want me to talk about it more. Every range of emotion gets exhibited when people visit battlefields. And, the example I give often is my first time at Devil's Den. I saw where a dead body was laying or was moved to, and I wanted to lay down there. That is not for everybody. But the veterans also exhibited a wide variety of what they did to remember, commemorate, or get closer to that event. So I would say as long as it's legal, interact with your battlefields the way you see. And let me just end on a moment of levity with this. This is the Trough Rock. I already showed you what this water is. And in our book, in a footnote, in mine, Tim's Devil's Den book, we have a recipe for Trough Rock stew. This is lima beans, corn, chicken stock, and 1 vial of this nasty, algae-ridden, bacterially dangerous water, and you put it in and make Trough Rock stew, and I've never confirmed whether we've actually done it. Thank you for watching.